Hi everyone, this is Mr. White from Illustration Class, and today we're going to talk about inking. For your assignment that's coming up, the first one, the editorial illustration, you're going to be using black and white, which means no grayscale in between, just black and white, but you can use a lot of different tricks to get some sort of value structures, including stippling, crosshatch, that kind of stuff, and I'm going to go over that in this video. But to start off, I'm going to show you some of the tools that you'll encounter commonly. Most of you probably have at least some of these in your toolkit already. But let's go over them right now. So we've got markers, black specifically. Then I have some brush pens, and I have microns and regular inking pens. Then I have ballpoint pens. Then I have a dip pen. This one is actually from my my compass set here. Just you can put this tip inside of that and make a circle, so it's pretty handy. But I couldn't find my regular one, so we're going to use that. Then we've got brushes, whiteout, and a toothbrush. So I don't know how many of you use toothbrushes for art, but it's pretty handy. So let's go over each one of them individually, some of the advantages and disadvantages. And I'm actually going to start you off with one thing. I have a hard and fast rule, and that rule is no Sharpies. No Sharpies. I know they're convenient, I know they're cheap, and they actually work really well, except that this ink is not archival. It's acidic, and it will bleed through your paper even after you think it's dry. It'll turn the back of it sort of this purple color, and if you have multiple drawings on top of each other, over time that ink will soak through and stain the drawings underneath. Now, okay, you're thinking, well, whatever, I don't keep my art, but as you become a professional, you might want to sell that art later on. And I have had hundreds of, not hundreds of drawings, but hundreds of dollars worth of drawings ruined by Sharpies back in the day before I realized what was going on. So a lot of people are like, yeah, sure, use Sharpies. No, do not use these, not in my class, not ever for art, ever again. Just, they don't have a place in art. Instead, use an art marker, an alcohol-based marker. This is from Ohuhu. It's very much like a Copic marker. Has the brush tip on one end and the chisel on the other. Works great, totally great. This is a Copic wide. That's for filling in big areas. I absolutely love it. And the best part is both of these are refillable with ink, so you can just keep reusing that again and again and again. Next, there's some brush. I'll tell you what, this is a really good time for me to go in and do a demonstration of what each of these looks like. And before we do that, I'm going to show you some kinds of paper, because paper matters. What you use to draw on can greatly influence how your final product looks. So I've got a few types to show. I've got basic copy paper. Then I have something called render paper, which is basically it's sketch paper that will not bleed through. So I can draw full markers on here and it will never show through to the back side. So you can use both sides, and it has a really nice surface. It's not too smooth, it's not too rough, it's just perfect. So I really love this paper. And it comes in these pads, it comes in spiral bound books, so I buy them and use them for like my Inktober drawings and stuff. And then lastly, we have Bristol board, which is what I have on my supply list for the class. And if you've never used Bristol board before, that looks like I had a drawing for something in here. It's thicker, and this is hot press, so it's smooth. And if you look, you can actually see the color difference, but it's not quite bright white, whereas the other two papers I showed you are bright white. And this also comes in cold press, which has a more of a texture. And you know, you can use that on your own projects if you want. It just depends on the style you want. But this stuff's really good because it gets a nice surface when you're drawing. All right, so I'm going to use a piece of render paper to go through this demonstration stuff. Get this all cleared out, and we'll go through some of the stuff. Okay, so let's try out some of these different pens, markers, and stuff. We'll start off by taking a Sharpie and chucking it, and then we'll go over here to the Ohuhu marker. We'll try some of the different tips. So the best thing about these is, you know, this is a brush tip. It's made out of nylon, I believe, and you can get a nice variety of lines. You can get thin, you can go down to thick, you can start thick. So you can really do a lot of great things. Awesome for drawing eyes. You know, Super simple. You can do a little texture work. So you can make some cool stuff really fast with these. It's just like, it's about like painting with a brush, but you don't have to dip it all the time. And I think you get a little more control, so it's pretty nice. And of course, with the chisel end, you can use, depending on what part of it you use, you can get different effects with that. And then this was the Copic wide, which, like I said, is huge. And this is great because you can really use pressure and get some feathering on it. And see how that's a really nice texture. You can do that for background stuff. Works great. One of the tricks you can do with that is actually to use some artist tape or masking tape or whatever, but this artist tape tends to work a little better than masking tape. You know, you can mask off a section and do that. Right? And then just pull this up. Except it's ripping my paper. Terrible. But you get a nice line. I guess this tape is old. I think the adhesive has started to get kind of nasty on it. One thing you can expect when you're doing this is to get ink all over your hands, so always have some paper towels handy. And rubbing alcohol would actually take this right off too. So those are markers. The next thing is something that I don't know if many of you have tried, but they've been around for quite a while now, and there are like dozens and dozens, if not 100 varieties of these, but the brush pens are so good. I bought these at Kinokuniya bookstore in New York City, but there is a really awesome website called jetpens.com, jetpens.com, and they have an incredible variety of pens, including these and so many more. And so, like the brush part of the marker, it has a softer nib, usually made out of nylon, and you can get finer details, so you can do some really nice hatching with this. Or if you're outlining your character, you know, you can really get that line weight look you might be going for. Works super great. This is my favorite. I think it's from Pilot. I actually don't know the name of it since it's in Japanese, but I have the product number, so I just always order for that. Here's another one. This one's a bit chunkier. It's more like a marker. So to get thin stuff is kind of challenging. I think it has, yeah, it has a finer, like a bullet nib on the other side. A little dried up, but this is the one I use the most. So the point is, there are lots of them, and if you ever have a chance to try out a bunch, it's really fun to do. Like my friends and I, since I have a lot of friends who are professional artists, freelancers like myself, we'll actually order like 10 different markers or pens or whatever, and then we'll all try them, and we'll chip in and pay, you know, split the cost. So you might do that with your friends sometime. It's a pretty cool way to get a lot of stuff for a little bit of money. This one's pretty dried up too, but when this is fresh, this is actually a really good marker, and I think it might, yeah, it's starting to come back. Just had to get the ink flowing in it. So this one is a little more organic, and you can probably see how it's getting kind of soft. And while your assignment doesn't accept value stuff, like no grays, technically when you photograph in high contrast, these are going to come across as a value, because it's going to drop out some of the middle tones and create basically like a manga screen tone. It'll be something similar to that effect. So let's go with the old standard here, ballpoint pens. I gotta be honest with you, there's nothing wrong with making art with a ballpoint pen. I do recommend that you use black, not blue, but this pen is fantastic. It gets a really nice sharp tip, good flow. You can't really do good stippling with it because the ball slips around a bit and gives you dashes instead of dots. But it's nice tip. And then this is just your standard black pen you would get anywhere. You take one from the bank or whatever. But it doesn't get quite as good of a line on it. It's a little iffy and skippy. So, you know, you can do something with these if you have to, but generally there are better tools. But don't ever let anybody make fun of you for, they're like, oh, you're not a real artist if you're using ballpoint pens. Yeah, you can use those. They're definitely okay. So next are microns. Probably everybody knows what these are. They're a really popular line. Unfortunately, they're very expensive. So I order mine from dickblick.com or Blick Art, and I buy them by the box. So they cost me less than I'd say half of what they do if you buy them at the store. And I have a variety of sizes: 003, 05, 02, and then I have a newer one over here called a Micron PN, which has quickly become one of my favorites. Since I do a lot of robot drawings and really like super intricate line art, I use these a lot. And actually I can show you. Here's one of the drawings I made recently. It's for a tabletop game called Battletech, and it was all done with the microns, and then the blacks were spotted in with one of the markers. So, and this is a Japanese paper that's super smooth. Cannot remember the name of this stuff. I ordered it like 15 years ago, and I ordered 1,000 pages, and I'm still using it. But really good paper. So that's what I do with these. The difference with the Micron PN is it's kind of like a quasi brush tip, where it's not a brush so much as it's just a little flexible. So you can actually get fine and slightly thicker. It just depends on how much control you have with your hand. I'm really heavy-handed, so I've actually broken pencils in half before while I'm drawing with them. I just get really like into it. So I have a little trouble controlling this one sometimes, but I do like it for doing sketch work. It's great. Like if I want to do nice final professional art, I don't use it, but for sketching, it's awesome. So those are microns. This is a Copic multiliner. This is pretty much the same thing as a micron. The big difference is you can replace the tip and the ink in this. So if it wears down, and look how ultra fine that line is, this can be replaced. So it works pretty well, but it costs more up front, I believe. So the last few, we're going to actually need ink instead of just having that. So what I have is I have a paint tray, and I have a bottle of ink. There are lots of different kinds of bottled ink. I've got some Higgins Black Magic, which is super dark. This Rapidograph ink is a little thinner, so you can use it in the pens. And always make sure you shake or mix these up. I'm unfortunately wearing a nice shirt, so I'm going to be really careful not to get this on me, because when this gets on clothing, it will not come out. But one of the things you should be aware of when you're using ink is always get the waterproof ink. You don't want water-based ink for any of this, because if you need to use other media on top of it, it won't work very well. So always get waterproof ink. Let's see how this goes. You don't need a lot. So this is pretty cool. It's not quite a dip pen, but it's similar. So I can actually adjust how thick the line will be by turning this little knob, so I can dip that in there. It'll load up. You can see it in there. And then I can just get it going, draw a line across. So if I make that a little wider, load it up, you can get some really cool lines. Get this cleaned out. You don't want to let the ink dry in there. So that's all set. So those are pretty neat. Then you have a couple brushes. You don't need a whole lot of brushes to do inking with. Generally you need one sort of fine one. I'm going to use my mouth to point this so you can see there's what it actually would look like when it was wet. I've got a fan brush, and I've got what's a totally ragged Sumi brush that I've had for literally 25 years. And these two I use for texture. So I would do my main inking with this brush, you know, where I would outline everything. Well, yeah, that's really nice. And you don't want a super short and stubby brush. The longer it is, the more it will absorb the shakiness from your hand. And I have pretty shaky hands, so a longer brush will do that. Also, a longer brush will hold more ink, so you can do longer strokes and go longer without actually having to reload your ink. Okay. Some of that out. I've got a bottle of water here. So while you're working, water is essential. When you're done, you want to wash these with soap and water. Soap and hot water, that is, to really keep it clean. Don't ever be like smash your tip around. That'll ruin the roots of your brush. Always be delicate with that. So let's see what we can do with the fan brush. can get some nice lines here. And I can do this is what's called dry brushing, where I've got a little ink loaded on there, and I kind of keep going. You can use this for shading on stuff. There's some cool manga that make use of this effect, like for trails and punch impacts and stuff. So you can get some interesting things. I think we can maybe, yeah, we can get some nice background texture with this. So you have to think, what's the right tool for the job? And by all means, experiment. Always have a spare piece of paper laying around when you're working with ink or paint or anything really, so you can try out ideas and see what you can kind of accomplish with that tool. Now let's see, we got the Sumi brush. This thing will hold a lot of ink. And I actually have a friend, his name's Greg Ruth. He's a local artist, but he is phenomenal at Sumi brush and other pen and ink, and we will actually take a look at some of his work in class. All right, yeah, look, this is great. You could do hair for an animal in here, or this could just be like the world's wildest eyebrow, but you get an incredibly nice texture. And then now that this is kind of just barely got ink in it, I can do some extra shading. And when I photograph this in high contrast, a lot of this will kind of disappear, but you'll be left with a very interesting texture on that. So I love Sumi brushes. Get that cleaned up. And I don't really recommend using your oil paint brushes with ink, because you kind of mess them up. I like to have brushes that are specifically for ink or watercolor, you know, anything specifically. So here's the toothbrush, and I'm afraid I'm going to get ink all over me. But this is really great for spatter effects. There's another artist, he's a comic artist, I'll show you some samples of. His name is Sean Gordon Murphy, and he does really kind of gnarly, gritty artwork. It's not like mainstream, ultra clean and nice, like my stuff is really commercial and like that. His is not. So you can use this to spatter, make spatter marks. Like if somebody was getting punched, or if they had dirty clothes on, you could kind of spatter this all over everything. Nice, right? I'm totally filthy now. And you can use this. And inversely, if you have a big field of black, or you've got a lot of black line art going on, you could take white paint or liquid whiteout, which I think Copic even makes some of that, and you could use the toothbrush to splatter white on top of it to get a negative effect, or you could make stars or snow with it. It's very versatile. So always have a toothbrush. And then of course, while that's on there, you can get some really cool effects. Depending on if I press really hard, it's almost like a brush. But like this could be like some guy just got punched in the face and that's blood spraying out of his mouth. You know, I know it's gross, but there's a lot of cool effects that you can do with the different tools. I'm gonna leave that in there to soak up a little bit. And so, looks like the last thing we have are these whiteout tools. This is just a Pentel Presto whiteout pen, and then this is a Uniball white jelly pen. And the reason why I have two of them is this is really fine tipped, and this one has a great big fat tip, and it actually comes out thicker than that. So you can shake this one up to get it going. Okay, so I use this a lot to outline stuff. Like if I have a hero or some kind of character from my sketch and I want to put a white outline around it, this works great because it's nice and thick and chunky. I can trace around, or highlights in the eyes, or some Kirby dots for energy patterns there. This is really great for that. This takes a little while to dry and it can be a little clumpy, but you can go over it with markers after it's dried a little bit, but it will tend to loosen it up and soak it back into the color, so it will be a little brighter than the colors around it. So you have to be a little careful, but you can plan ahead and make some cool effects. And sometimes this will even soak up the color underneath of it, especially reds, I think. So you can get some interesting effects. But then this finer pen, you can see it's nice and fine. I use this for edging details. Like if I have a lot of color and stuff and I want to put just like a rim light on something, or a couple of dots along an edge to add sort of a extra bit of accent. There's really cool stuff you can do with these pens. So I recommend both of these as a permanent part of your toolkit. Now, I think that covers the basic drawing tools, and now we will move on to the next part, which is sort of all the extra stuff you can use to integrate into your workflow. Okay? All right, this is going to be the last part of the video. We'll wrap up a few things. I want to show you a couple of things that I forgot the last time, which was sponges. If anybody has any sponges laying around, these are great for texture. You dip them in ink and then you brush them around, and you can make like fur for animals. I made a bear drawing once using one of these. It looked so cool, like you really could get a lot of interesting detail out of it. And that would work for paint too. So always consider what you've got laying around and how can you use it to get texture, because as part of any piece of art, there are some key features like composition, dominance, color, texture. Texture is so important in things. So the more something looks like fur or asphalt or grass or cloth, the more interesting it's going to be to a viewer. So always consider what you've got around and how you can use it. A couple of the other things I wanted to show you were sort of like accessory tools to inking. One of them is an eraser guide, which I don't know if you've seen those before, but they're handy. I've got a couple of different erasers, some fancy stuff. I've got a couple of pencils. I've got the tape, which you saw before. This is artist tape. This is also really good for watercolor. I've got French curve, which I have a huge set of. What else do I have? I've got a circle guide. I have dozens of circle and ellipse guides for drawing. Stuff like that. With the robot, you can see I've used little circles and ellipses to draw a lot of the little parts. And then I've got a couple of rulers here. So all of these things are really valuable. And the tape, you can imagine what you can do. You can use it to block out areas and then pull it up later. I believe this ripped off part of my paper earlier, so test it on paper before you use it. I might not like this paper, or it might just be because this is really old that it did that. Next, the French curve. This actually has a recessed lip on it, so let's find a nice fat pen. Here's a 05. When you draw along this, you'll get a nice clean edge and the ink won't suck up under the edge. But if I did it on this, you have a good chance, especially the wetter the pen, the ink might get under there. Like when I pulled this away, you can just barely see it like dragged out. That can be worse sometimes, and it can actually be a point where you have to go back and use whiteout to cover it up. So it depends on your effect. If you're going for nice clean art, then yeah, you want to clean it up. So one of the ways you can solve that, because it can happen with your rulers too, is anytime you buy a ruler, the first thing you do is you flip it over and you put a piece of masking tape or a piece of art tape on it. And that will raise it up just enough so that it pretty much has that same sort of lip that this does, and it will keep your ink from smearing under the edge of the ruler. So that's my suggestion to you. Any ruler you have should have this on the bottom of it, and it'll make your inking life more pleasant. So you also have to be really careful with ellipses, because you can't put tape under these guides. So you have to be pretty careful about how you do these. And I wanted to show you specifically that when you are using these guides, it's really easy to just sit here and hold your pen like you do normally and draw this out. And did you see what just happened? It just slipped under the edge. Also, it's not accurate at all. It's actually shifted over because I was lazy about holding my pen. So what you should really do with these is you should hold your pen as directly upright as possible. Exactly upright. Nice and even. And then you get a really nice circle. Now you can see this starting dot. Not much you can do about that unless you're really good at controlling your pressure. But straight up and down, you get a much better result. It'll also prevent it from seeping in underneath the edge. But a good practice is to draw, wait just a couple of seconds, and then don't slide this off. Pick it up from the corner and pull it up like that, and that will avoid any of that streaking that you might get otherwise. So words to the wise, that is a good best practice to use. Had these two pencils. So the difference in these is just, this is a standard mechanical graphite pencil, so nothing special. It's just 2H, I believe, graphite. And then this is a Kohl Erase Prismacolor pencil. A lot of you are into animation. You probably know they use non-photo blue. That's kind of why people use these blue pencils now. Another reason, well, the basic reason is non-photo. This is not non-photo. That's a more cyan kind of color and lighter in value. But when you scan something in or photograph it, this doesn't have as high contrast as the ink, so you can go in and adjust your levels later, and this blue, which you would probably turn to grayscale first, would just drop out of your picture. As far as the erasers go, not all erasers treat ink the same way. I have a sample here. So last semester I saw a lot of students using these. They're garbage. I saw them using red school erasers that go on the tip of your pencil. Garbage. Any eraser that comes on a pencil, complete garbage. This thing, you try to erase, it doesn't really do anything. This one actually didn't leave red, but a lot of the school erasers will just leave red all over your page, or they'll crumble. They can even rip it. They'll take up your ink. Like, I don't know how abrasive this is, but since this is an art pencil, maybe it's not so bad, but I don't recommend those. I recommend either a foam eraser, which this is from Kinokuniya in New York City, or a plastic eraser, which these are readily available. Once your ink dries, and that's key, once your ink dries, these won't hurt it. And then you can see, very effective against erasing that stuff. Foam eraser doesn't work quite as well, but the foam eraser is even less destructive to your line art. So if you have a lot of pencil drawing underneath of it, you might want to use this. It'll be a little more delicate. And this, just like the Sharpie, don't use it. Total crap. I've got my handy dandy brush here, so I don't leave eraser boogers everywhere. So gross. Get that gone. I don't recommend drawing with a red pencil, which I do for sketching when I don't want to erase it, but if you want to erase it, red doesn't come up very easily, so be warned of that. What else we got? Oh, the eraser guide. I didn't show you how to use this. So eraser guides are pretty great because you're working. Let's do some basic pencil stuff here. You're working, right? You got all these lines, got these little contraptions going on, my drawings. All right, so then I go in and I ink it. You know, you get the point of what's going on here. So let's say you're penciling and you're like, oh, I wanted to get rid of that line to redraw it. But when you go in with your big chunky eraser, you just erased all the stuff around it, which isn't ideal. Like if you have a really intricate drawing, like say you're drawing a face and you want to just get, that's a better one. You want to get the eye. So let's say you got a face here. Right? Draw your eye. Right? What if you want to erase this eye, but you don't want to erase the rest of the face? You literally just go in here and this would destroy everything around it. So what you do is use your handy dandy eraser guide. That fits just about right. And then you can use that to erase. And then it protected everything around it. So I can go back and I can clean up that little line. So now I was able to target what I erased without destroying the other stuff around it. Then I could ink it and I would have a nice clean drawing. I didn't have to, worry about getting that eye just right or the nose just right again around it. Eraser guides are great. And then this thing, for a long time I was totally in love with this. I thought it was the best thing ever. But it has really abrasive erasers, to be honest. They had nylon ones and these, and the nylon didn't work very well, so I was using this. And yeah, it just doesn't work. So I can't really recommend these things. Plus, it's in my drawer, and every time I push my drawer in, something hits this and it goes off of my drawer, and I have to open my drawer, reorient it so it's not like buzzing for the rest of the day. So, nah, you don't need those. Let's see. I think that was kind of it for the tools. Last thing I want to show you is this book, which is DC Comics Guide to Inking. It's by Klaus Janson. He's a comic artist himself who's done some cool stuff. This book has pretty much everything I was talking about and more. There's a lot of good stuff in here. Plenty of samples for tools. Oh, look, they have the bendable ruler. I didn't show you that. I've got that right here. I'll go over that in a second. So they show you there's some Mobius work here. His stuff's awesome. They talk about positive and negative, how to control foreground elements. This is a great book. It's not required by any means for this class, but if you're ever interested in inking, this is a really good one. Totally recommend it. So, bendable curve. This thing is the best. There's a piece of lead in here, so it's very flexible, but it will still retain its shape. Since I've drawn a lot of Hot Wheels books, I have to draw all their tracks. And tracks, for example, if I want to do a parallel line over long distances, I can't really do it, right? But with this, I put it in the shape I want, I carefully hold it, and then I can just move it in a little bit, get the shape I want. Boom. Perfect and beautiful. So these things are awesome. Bendable ruler. Great. So what else do I have on my talking points here? I talked about texture. I didn't really talk about light source. I mean, that's kind of art 101. But with ink, it's so easy to accentuate strong black and white for light sources that you really should keep it in mind, because if I draw two faces here, I can quickly and easily differentiate a light source with them. Draw some basic structure. Right, so let's just use this nice and fast. I can set the light source on the side. Heavy from the top. Right? Super fast. Real easy. For this one, I could do just like directly overhead. Right, so same structure, totally different look because I controlled the light source. There's an infinite number of ways I could have done that. I could have done the light under. I could have done it sort of 3/4 in the front, where it would have had, instead of solid, it would have had like a light fill on the side, which I can actually go back into it with my whiteout pen here, kind of draw in some elements, add some eye highlights or something. Little rim lighting on the side here. So there's a lot you can do with lighting. It's always something you should consider up front before you do the inking, so that you can kind of account for where you want your lines. What else we got? We got linear versus painterly. That's a good one. A lot of line art, a lot of inking is considered linear, where what I just did, is very painterly. I didn't put lines. I didn't draw out the exact outline first. I didn't make the nose a set of lines. I didn't do any of that stuff. That would be very linear, traditional inking. Instead, I used painterly techniques where I filled in large areas of value, and I could go back in with markers and do the same with color. So there's the linear versus painterly. You know, your style can be whatever you want. I think you should consider both and anything in between. So there's a terminology I want to define right now called spotting. I'll probably use it in class. Spotting is the process of filling in black areas. So if I have a lot of ink work, I don't think you can even see that line. If I have a lot of ink work, I'm doing stuff here. As I'm going, spotting is the process of filling in areas that are black. So in comics, it's traditional to go through and just put an X inside of areas that should be filled with black. So you go through, you do all your finer line art, then you go in and you add your accents, and at the end you take a brush and ink and you just fill in, or a marker, and you fill in, so you spot all of these areas and you just fill in all your blacks at once. And that ink, or the X, is a clue to an inker. So for example, you're a penciler and you want something to be black, but you don't want to spend your time, you know, like a half hour just shading in everything black, which they just have to erase later anyway. You put in these X's, and when the inker sees it, he's like, oh, I have to spot that. So works out pretty well. Another one is line weight to define dominance. So that's also sort of Art 101. You put outlines around stuff, or you do thicker lines on the bottom. That way you can accentuate things that are in the foreground or more important, or have a heavier weight and shadow to them. You can play around with that stuff, but always be mindful of it. And I think sort of the last one is squint. Of all things, when you're doing a drawing, especially one that's black and white, kind of stand back from a little bit, squint, and that makes the contrast sharper so that you don't see middle tones as much. And that way you can sort of observe your value structure and determine whether or not it's working. Is your piece, is the part of your image you want to be dominant actually dominant? Like when you squint, is it the first thing that you see, or is it not even noticeable? If it's not, then your dominant element isn't dominant. So squinting is always a really great technique just to kind of get like a general overview of how your piece is working and flowing. And I think that's it. So in class, we'll cover a few real artists who do this kind of stuff. I'll show you some of their art, and we can talk about your sketches, and I think that'll be it. All right, so thanks everybody, and I will see you in class soon.